I've had huge losses. I've had great successes. I've been so lucky. I do think that the thing about huge losses, it just makes you keep going. And I feel like a bumper car. What I would want for you girls, and what I would want for everyone, and especially women, is that you don't take no for an answer, because no is just some bullshit word that someone made up.
At 80 years old, Cher is still called indestructible. But no woman earns that title without being handed something devastating to survive first. The world remembers the voice, the gowns, the jet black hair, the Oscar, the one-liners, the comebacks, and that timeless anthem, Believe. But behind every sequin and spotlight was a girl who once learned that love could be completely real and still fail to protect you. A young woman who had to fight just to own her own name. And now, a mother facing the hardest truth of all, that fame, money, and sheer force of will cannot always reach a child in time. Cher did not become unstoppable because life was kind to her. She became unstoppable because every time something was taken, a home, a marriage, a sense of family, a piece of her youth, or the comforting illusion that love could save everyone, she found a way to rise again. And here's what most people don't know.
Do you care when you make mistakes in public?
Well, I think I used to, but what are they going to do to me now?
What are they going to do to you now?
I'm 78. What are they going to do to me?
You're 78?
Yeah.
The moment that truly shaped who Cher became happened long before the music, long before the cameras, and long before the world ever heard her name. Through the window of a Catholic orphanage, a little girl once stood watching for the face of her mother. Too young to understand how love could be real and still leave you standing on the wrong side of the glass. Before the rhinestones, before the Bob Mackie gowns, before the voice that would one day fill arenas across the world, there was simply a child born in El Centro, California in 1946, into a life that kept shifting beneath her feet. Her mother, Georgia Holt, was beautiful, ambitious, and restless in the way so many women were when their dreams were far larger than the rooms life offered them. Georgia wanted a stage, a song, a real chance. And at the very same time, she had a daughter who needed something far simpler, steadiness. Cher's father, John Paul Sarkeesian, was absent for much of her early childhood, leaving behind a quiet space that no photograph could fill. Money was uncertain. Homes kept changing. Adults came and went. The ordinary promises of childhood, the same bed, the same school, a familiar hand at the end of the day, felt temporary at best. Years later, Cher would look back at the orphanage with a child's old questions still echoing inside her. Why hadn't her mother simply walked in and taken her home? Georgia's answer carried no drama. She had nothing then, no money, no stable work, no power. The institution around her was stronger than one young mother standing alone. And that is exactly what made the wound so deep. Love had not been absent. It simply had not been powerful enough to keep the glass from standing between them. School offered no rescue either. In the classroom, the struggle took a different shape. Letters on the board refused to settle the way they seemed to for every other child. Words blurred, shifted, and resisted her. Years later, dyslexia would finally give a name to what she had been living through. But as a young girl, she had no such protection. Without a diagnosis, difficulty is easily mistaken for laziness, for rebellion, for a lack of intelligence. Every desk became another place to feel exposed. The chalkboard at the front of the room felt less like a lesson and more like a public test she kept failing. Other children copied, answered, and moved on. Cher carried the quiet weight of being misunderstood by adults who saw the struggle but never looked for what was underneath it. At 16, she left school and headed to Los Angeles, not with the cool confidence of someone certain of their destiny, but with the restless courage of someone who had never truly been held by one place. The city did not offer comfort. It offered possibility. And for a girl who had already learned to keep walking, possibility was enough. Then Sonny Bono walked into her life, and he arrived less like a stranger and more like a doorway. Older, experienced, connected to rooms she hadn't yet learned to enter. He knew studios, producers, arrangements, timing, all the invisible machinery that shapes a song long before the public ever hears it. To Cher, he was attentive, knowledgeable, and close enough to feel like safety. He saw something in her before the rest of the world did. The low voice, the stillness, the long dark hair, and a face that didn't look like every other girl being pushed toward a microphone. There is real tenderness in that beginning, but there is imbalance in it too. Sonny opened doors, but he also stood very close to the handle. Then I Got You Babe arrived, and America didn't just listen. America adopted them. Sonny and Cher were strange, charming, funny, and magnetic in a way that felt deeply personal to millions of families watching from their living rooms. The song made them into a shared memory, a promise set to music. And their success didn't stop at records. The Sonny and Cher comedy hour brought them straight into the domestic heart of the country, into kitchens and family rooms where viewers laughed, smiled, and felt like they were watching two people who truly belonged to each other. But as you'll soon discover, what looked like a perfect partnership on screen was quietly becoming something far more complicated behind closed doors. The costumes, the banter, the playful rhythm of husband and wife turned into primetime entertainment. It all looked effortless from the outside. But publicly becoming half of a beloved image carries a weight that posters never show. The gap between Sonny and Cher seemed harmless enough on screen. In reality, it quietly defined the space she was allowed to occupy. America didn't just love Cher. It loved the version of Cher standing beside him. And that distinction mattered more than anyone realized at the time. Schedules, contracts, television timing, money, public image, all of it was built around a structure she did not fully control. The audience saw romance and laughter. Behind the applause was a young woman slowly discovering that being adored by millions did not automatically mean being seen as whole. The louder the country cheered for Sonny and Cher, the harder it became for Cher to hear her own name without his attached to it. When she finally stepped outside that frame, the air around her shifted. The industry watched, the way it always watches women who leave familiar outlines, waiting to see whether she could hold the room alone. In the 1970s, her solo work helped carve out a separate sound and a separate identity. But every step came with people quietly deciding what she was allowed to be. Too bold for one category, too theatrical for another. Too connected to television for some, too glamorous for others to take seriously. Her image was so powerful, it sometimes stood in front of her actual craft, blocking the view. Hollywood tends to reward women who are easy to understand. Cher was never easy to file away. That became both her greatest strength and one of the lonelier parts of her climb. Then the film roles arrived, and they changed everything. Silkwood gave her weight. Mask gave her tenderness and grit. The Witches of Eastwick let audiences see her inside an ensemble of women carrying real wit and adult force. And then came Moonstruck, and with it, an Oscar. That moment mattered not because it erased the years of doubt, but because it made those years stand behind her like witnesses. Before the win, the look she wore to the 1986 Academy Awards had already said everything. Black feathers, bare skin, unapologetic defiance shaped into a silhouette no one in that room could ignore. It was more than a dress. It was Cher refusing to shrink so other people could feel comfortable calling her serious. By the time she held that gold statue, the woman on that stage was carrying far more than an award. She was carrying the memory of every room that had ever mistaken her glamour for emptiness. But recognition never came with a guarantee. The industry's patience with women has always had an expiration date, and Cher kept arriving at the age when people expected her to quietly step aside. Instead, she kept returning, each time with a different face of professional survival. This was never a comeback story. It was a refusal to stay buried every time the world decided her time had passed. Then Believe happened. In a late 1990s studio, a voice the world already knew was pushed through technology into something metallic and futuristic. Yet the wound inside the song stayed completely human. A woman over 50, singing about heartbreak with a voice that sounded like it had traveled through time and come back colder, brighter, and somehow even more alive. The world called it a comeback, but Cher's life had never moved in one clean direction. A trophy couldn't rewrite the early contracts. A #1 song couldn't make old rooms gentle. The world had learned to chant her name, but the woman carrying that name still had to walk back through the chapters where freedom had first come at a cost. By 1974, the public image of Sonny and Cher had grown larger than the marriage itself. Viewers had laughed with them, sung with them, believed in the shape of them together. For Cher, the break was more than the end of a private relationship. It was the dismantling of the house America had built around her name. Sonny had opened doors for her when she was young and unguarded, and that truth made the pain impossible to simplify. He had seen the unusual power in her before the world fully did. He knew the rooms, the machinery, the men who could build or break a career. He was part of her rise, and yet the very same structure that lifted her had kept power gathered too tightly around him. Their separation in 1974 and divorce in 1975 became a slow professional and personal unraveling, thread by thread. Legal papers, business questions, a name that still seemed to arrive paired with his. Cher had to leave the person who had once felt like shelter, then step out into the cold air with no peace. Promise that the world would accept her standing alone. America lost a couple. Cher lost a partner, a shared identity, and the comfortable illusion that applause could be mistaken for freedom. Applause had made her famous. It had not made her free. Then Gregg Allman entered her world, and their collision had the force of two very different storms. Her glittering pop life meeting his southern rock gravity, his road-worn voice, his heavier nights and restless rhythm. They married in 1975, close enough to the end of her life with Sonny that the new beginning still carried the breath of the old ending. To the public, it looked fierce and romantic. Inside the home, the light was far more complicated. Schedules that didn't align, emotional weather that shifted without warning, and two people trying to build something steady from lives that had rarely known steadiness. When Elijah Blue Allman was born in 1976, the stakes became tender and painfully real. Cher was no longer simply a woman trying to recover from one public unraveling. She was a young mother holding an infant, while the world still expected her to appear polished, funny, glamorous, and completely ready. Outside, she belonged to crowds. Inside, she was trying to make a home breathe evenly. The marriage didn't survive. By 1979, it was over, leaving behind the quiet ache of an effort that had once carried real hope. Two people can love each other and still fail to build the kind of shelter a family needs. But Elijah made it impossible to simply close that chapter and walk away. Love had become a child, and a child changes everything. Now, this is the part of Cher's story that most people don't talk about, and it may be the most painful chapter of all. Cher had two children from two very different lives, Chaz Bono from her years with Sonny and Elijah Blue Allman from her time with Gregg. With Chaz, Cher had to learn in public what most parents learn in private, that love alone is not enough. It also requires humility, patience, and the willingness to be changed by your child. The stage had trained her to project certainty. Motherhood asked for something quieter, the strength to be corrected by life and still remain present. With Elijah, the pain became more visible in recent years, though never simple enough for easy judgment. In 2023 and 2024, Cher sought a form of conservatorship over her son due to concerns about his well-being and finances. That effort was later withdrawn following a private agreement. Then, in April 2026, reports emerged that she had filed again, this time requesting a professional fiduciary named Jason Rubin to serve as temporary conservator, rather than seeking the role for herself. The petition stated that Elijah's condition had significantly deteriorated, raising serious concerns about his mental health, substance use, and ability to manage his own financial affairs. On April 24, 2026, a Los Angeles judge denied the temporary request without prejudice, meaning it could be refiled. Reports also indicated that Elijah appeared remotely from a psychiatric facility in New Hampshire, where he was also facing separate criminal charges. These are cold sentences for a warm wound. Behind every legal filing, every court date, every carefully worded petition, there is a mother approaching 80 years old, with a name recognized around the world, facing the knowledge that none of it is enough. Fame cannot make a child answer. Fortune cannot make a family uncomplicated, and no amount of force of will can make fear easier to translate into law. A woman can survive gossip, divorce, aging, and public ridicule. But nothing in this world makes a mother feel more powerless than loving a child she cannot reach. A phone sitting on a table becomes its own quiet stage. It doesn't ring when a mother needs it to. A hallway outside a courtroom becomes another kind of backstage, except there is no applause waiting on the other side. Only doors, papers, and people speaking in careful, measured terms about a life that once began as a baby in her arms. The public remembers the star before it remembers the mother. People see the gowns, the awards, the sharp humor, the indestructible image. They don't sit in the house when the rooms have gone still. They don't know how long a mother can stare at a phone without touching it. They don't feel the private exhaustion of loving an adult child whose pain cannot be lifted by a check, a song, a famous last name, or the sheer force of wanting. Cher could hold an entire arena with a single glance. But family pain doesn't obey stagecraft. It walks into the house without caring who the world thinks you are. It sits beside old photographs. It waits in unanswered spaces. It turns the word mama into both memory and prayer. Some wounds in a family never reach a clean ending. They simply learn to travel beneath makeup, sunglasses, and public appearances. Cher kept walking back into the light, but a mother's fear followed quietly behind her. The church was quieter than any studio they had ever shared. There were no cue cards, no comic timing, no familiar rhythm of an audience waiting for the next line. Sonny Bono had passed away in January 1998 following a skiing accident, and Cher stood in a place where the old language of performance could no longer protect anyone. The man she had left, the man she had challenged, the man who had first shaped her public face, he was now beyond any argument. That kind of goodbye doesn't fit neatly into love or anger, gratitude or pain. It holds all of them at once. Sonny had been her husband, her partner, the father of Chaz, the person who opened doors she hadn't known existed, and the person whose presence she had ultimately needed to outgrow. For years, America could replay the old image whenever it wanted. Sonny and Cher, side by side, a song in the air, laughter moving across a television screen like light. At the funeral, that picture had changed forever. One half of that sound was gone. Cher's grief in that moment belonged to a woman who understood history with her whole body. She wasn't simply mourning a former husband. She was standing before a chapter that could no longer be revised. There would be no later conversation to soften what had been hard. No quiet phone call to clear the air. No private chance to ask whether either of them had ever fully understood what they had meant to each other. There are people who leave your life long before they leave this world. And still, when they are finally gone, the rooms inside memory rearrange themselves. That same year, Cher was standing at the edge of another extraordinary rise. Believe was coming, a sound that would carry her into the future and stun an industry that had already decided her best years were behind her. The timing carried its own quiet weight. As one chapter of her past was being laid to rest, the world was preparing to ask her for another act of reinvention. She would stand again beneath the lights. But inside the woman walking toward that future was the hush of a church, a familiar name that could no longer answer, and the knowledge that survival sometimes asks you to keep moving before her heart has had any chance to catch up. In 2024, Cher's memoir offered a different kind of spotlight entirely. No dancers, no costumes, no chorus lifting the room. Just a woman returning to the places where her name, her choices, and her freedom had once been shaped by other people's hands. She returned to childhood, to early hunger, to Sunny, to the rooms where she had been too young to understand the full cost of certain decisions. One detail cut deeper than any other. When Cher legally changed her name in 1979, she discovered that the name recorded on her birth certificate didn't match the name she had long believed was hers. Even that paper carried a fracture. The single syllable the world could chant was never just a brand. It became an act of ownership, a way of saying, after all the names attached to fathers, stepfathers, husbands, contracts, and headlines, this one will finally belong to me. Recognition arrived in formal rooms too. The Kennedy Center Honors in 2018 placed Cher inside a national frame of respect, the kind that doesn't come from charts alone, but from cultural memory itself. Then, in 2024, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame gave her a place in the official architecture of American music, late enough for the honor to carry its own ache. Because a ceremony can celebrate a lifetime while also making visible just how long a woman had to keep proving something that should have been obvious. Cher kept standing there, older, sharper, still funny, still guarded, still completely and unmistakably herself. Then there was Kaven, the elephant, whose story drew Cher into a different kind of rescue altogether. The image felt almost too exact. A large, lonely creature stepping out of decades of confinement, while Cher, who had spent her own lifetime unlocking invisible frames built around her, helped push one very visible door open for another living being. It was more than a cause. It looked like recognition. One form of captivity meeting another and refusing to look away. Cher did not arrive at some peaceful, tidy conclusion. She kept working, kept writing, kept appearing, kept caring, and around her the world kept changing while she remained. The people who once stood closest to her have receded into memory. Sunny is gone. Greg Allman is gone. Her mother, Georgia Holt, is gone. The earliest rooms of Cher's life no longer hold the people who built them. Children grow into their own complicated histories. Friends, lovers, and family become photographs, interviews, songs played back from another year. A career archive can glitter brilliantly, while the private rooms beyond it hold an entirely different temperature. At 80, Cher exists inside a rare kind of fame, the kind that has crossed generations without losing its shape. Younger audiences see proof that reinvention can outlast fashion. Older audiences carry the ache of decades they lived through alongside her. Her return to Saturday Night Live in 2025 offered a living image of endurance, Cher stepping once more in front of cameras, still singing, still impossible to ignore. But the house behind a legend is never as crowded as the stage. Believe may still be playing somewhere right now for a stranger who needs help surviving a goodbye, but the woman who sang it knows that most goodbyes don't return with a chorus. There are mornings when legacy probably feels less like a crown and more like a room full of objects that remember too much. A costume without the body inside it. A photograph with a voice missing from the frame. A chair that belongs to a chapter no one can reopen. The little girl who once watched the world through orphanage glass became a woman the entire world watches through glass screens. Still visible, still brilliant, still carrying rooms no audience will ever fully enter. The world calls her indestructible because it has watched her keep standing. But standing is not the same as being untouched. Cher survived because each time life took something, a marriage, a home, a version of family, a piece of youth, or one more illusion she could no longer afford, she found a way to return. With fewer illusions, yes, but with a voice the world still could not dismiss. She is not indestructible because she never broke. She is indestructible because she kept learning how to live after each breaking. The applause remains. The quiet rooms beyond it remain too. And somewhere between them stands Cher, the woman who spent a lifetime showing others how to keep going, while still living with the one question no spotlight has ever been able to answer. Who takes care of the loneliness of the woman who has spent her whole life saving herself? If Cher's voice ever helped you survive a goodbye, drop the song that stayed with you in the comments below. And if her story moved you, give it a like, she's earned it. Make sure you subscribe to Celebrity Insider so you never miss the real stories behind the legends the world thinks it already knows.